This panel is entitled How to Best Defend Your Organization Against Ransomware. But in reality, the panel could just be called Security 101 and why failures to adhere to Security 101 or inadherences in a polite way, I guess, causes a lot of ransomware attacks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start introducing the folks that are on the panel. We have 5 different people, 4 of which I see right now. So I'm going to introduce them as the names are on the screen. First up, we've got Stephanie Regan, who I work with on a daily, but close to a daily basis at Palo Alto Networks Unit 42. Stephanie is an IR consultant, and she is freaking awesome. Hi, Stephanie. How you doing?
Good. How are you, Ryan?
I'm good. I'm glad to have you here.
Glad to be here.
All right. Let's see. My screen just changed, so I'm going to the next name in the agenda. We also have Michael Rogers, who is very used to doing these panels since he's been with us for a couple of these bad boys. So he's with MOXFIVE, and we love his opinions. And he was one of the first ones in our call for papers who was like, me, I want on that panel. So Michael, how you doing? Hello.
Great, thanks. Appreciate it.
All right. Next up, we've got Jim Walter, who I think if you were just tuned in, you just saw him. So I know him as Threat Jim. Jim and I have been on info sharing for a number of years now. It's always good to see you. Hello, by the way. So, hi.
Good to be here.
All right. Next up, we have Aaron Walton, who is a threat intel analyst with Expel. It's another person with whom I've been sharing intel for a couple of years, and am very excited to have him on board. So, hello, good sir.
Thank you.
I'm all excited, like, hello, and they're like, hi. How's it going, Ryan? And then last but definitely not least, we have Mr. John Hammond, who some of you may already know. John has a couple, like, I don't know, 5 or 10 followers, I think, on YouTube. 1 million, 5 or 10, one of the two. So John and I got to meet up at was it DEF CON a couple of years back, and have been chatting randomly and been on one another show and things of that nature. So John, hello, good to have you.
Hey, thanks so much. Super happy to be here, and thank you for letting me join the party.
Heck yeah, man. So we have a 5-person panel along with a moderator who just loves to run his mouth. So I'm going to do my best job to kind of shush and leave it to the panel members to answer some of the questions that we've come up with. And the design for this panel, honestly, it came from, the title came from myself. I was like, I want to talk about this. But when Michael was filling out the call for papers, he gave a phenomenal abstract. And I was like, yeah, let's just do that. So that's what we're doing. We're going to start off with, and again, this is really all based on like Security 101, right? How can you best prevent ransomware within your organization? And it really boils down to Security 101 principles, processes being adhered to by, well, people and processes and systems and whatever you've got. So we're going to start with Stephanie, just because we grabbed an order and we're like, there we go. But the first question is, I'll just paraphrase it because I'd rather just not read and look into the camera. So users can be the saviors of and or the downfall of the organization. So what are some of the best tips and tricks that you have in terms of security awareness, things that we can kind of help our user bases with in order to avoid ransomware?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. So really, I want to start out here with phishing. As we know, phishing and social engineering are still massive percentages of all types of breaches, whether it be ransomware or cross the gamut for other types of breaches as well. And there's tons of advice out there on how to spot a phish, how to kind of avoid phishing and things like that. So I want to really focus on what we've seen in the last kind of year, the recent trends, changes, and maybe some of the things that we don't hear as often. So really one of the things I wanted to kind of talk about to kick us off is the threat actors have gotten a heck of a lot better at phishing. I mean, a lot of us in our user awareness training, we still see, hey, look for the typos, look for the terrible sentences and PDFs that just look absolutely awful and all these things. And I think that's like a lot of our crux of these playbooks that we're using to educate our users on a daily basis. And reality is they've gotten a lot better. They have better site and graphic emulations. Documents look really authentic now. A lot of the links that you're getting really look like something you might expect. There's less typos, there's native speakers, they're starting to use AI to inject and to emulate some of the different conversations that you might actually be looking to have. So it is a bit of a daunting world out there when it comes to phishing now. It really is easy to get caught up in some of those traps. I personally am a big fan of phishing test programs. We do them here. I've seen a lot of companies be very successful. It really doesn't need to be that gotcha mentality that a lot of people are worried about when implementing a phishing test or having those conversations internally. But really, it's something that can be used as an awareness builder, something that just keeps users on edge, keeps users looking out for those tricks and downfalls. And the big two things that I still see sticking out with phishing is urgency and attachments. So with those, urgency is always something that is really impacted by company culture. If your company culture goes around and says, hey, if the CIO or the CISO calls you, every single SOP goes out the window and you need to do what they tell you now, you're gonna have some ransomware being deployed in your engagements. So those types of things can really be influenced by company culture and really sticking to policies and procedures when urgency is applied to a request, whether it be legitimate or illegitimate. And then the other part is that typically with attachments and things like that, it's still not perfect. There usually still is a flaw or a limitation somewhere in the chain. You're going to have something that you're not expecting, some different mentality. Maybe you get stuff via share file and it's using Dropbox, or, you get a web link, but it's usually a PDF attachment. Something is usually a little different. And also, the more we can navigate things to natively, hey, it's a FedEx link. Let me go out to the FedEx website and navigate to it and type in my actual or copy over the tracking number versus clicking the link, or utilize your bookmark that And then often, a lot of the time, something breaks. If you click on a document, if you authenticate or something like that, if we fall prey to a phishing attack, our user education really needs to be cruxing on when you get to that weird spot where you're routed to a page that's unexpected, or a file doesn't actually load, or something like that, which is very telltale of something going wonky in the background. That's the time to get your sock on the line if you've actually gotten that far and now files aren't acting the way that you think they should. Definitely can keep going on this topic, but want to make sure we pass it over. It looks like Michael's got his hand up, so.
Yeah, I just want to say I think you had a lot of really good points there, especially one that isn't commonly brought up is, if something does happen and you authenticate, you have a failed login, you think it's a little bit off, then you should definitely let your security team know so that you stop it early versus just assuming, just going on with business, even though your credentials may be out there. So yeah, really good points. And I know one thing I also wanted to raise up as kind of a common trend too is you mentioned the CEO type of phishing emails. It's pretty automated at this point with every company, right? So making sure if anyone doesn't have phishing training or security training for their new hires, getting that in place before they really get into that environment, because the first week they're going to get an automated email and they're going to be extremely excited that the CEO reached out to them, think that they should maybe send a gift card, but that could also lead to a bigger incident outside of just spending a couple dollars on a gift card. One other big piece that as you mentioned, it's getting more complex. Threat actors are getting more advanced with social engineering mixed into phishing. So one thing is business email compromises. Those are pretty common that we all deal with day to day. And even if you get a legitimate email from a partner, a company, a client, that may still be a phishing email. So like you said, looking for those nuanced changes, or avoiding sending wires or clicking and downloading files. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. It's just going to get more complicated, especially with all the business email compromises we see. And I did want to give an example of one of the first phishing ransomware incidents I had when I got into this space dealing with ransomware, where a threat actor had a business email compromised. They saw it was a manufacturing shop floor employee that was meeting with a paint company, that the threat actor then sent an attachment to the user that was malicious, basically related to the paint meeting, and they downloaded it, and that ended up being a full encryption event. So pretty neat tactic from a threat actor with a business email compromise that I haven't seen since, but that's just a good example, right? Where it's just becoming it's going to only evolve and get more complicated to stop. So yeah, great points.
I just want to point out that I was once working on a security operations center for a very, very large company, very, very big company. And we received an email from the CEO. And I was like, shut up. Report is phishing, like to our own team, right? Report is phishing. And then I got a call like 5 minutes later. And it was like, hey, I was like, wait a minute. I know your voice. That is the CEO. Oops. Hi. So yeah, you never know these days. Stuff has gotten much, much better. And then the whole QR phishing. Okay. We're going to move on because we have at least 6 or 7 questions I'd like to get to, but with such amazing folks on the panel, who knows if we'll, hit all the questions, but we're going to have fun regardless. So next up, the top 3 infection vectors, and they keep jockeying for position over the years for ransomware. And not at this point, in no particular order, really, are RDP, of course, remote desktop protocol, just being open to the internet, on DCs and all that kind of fun stuff. Software vulnerabilities, because, patch cycles, if they even exist, or, months apart, if they exist, and people even know what software or assets are out there. And then, what did I just mention? RDP, software, and phishing, as we just mentioned. So we're going to start off here with John. John, what are some comments you have as to those 3 infection vectors and things that you're just seeing where you're like, we got to fix this?
Well, goodness, thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of runway there. RDP, like exposed, open, remote desktop protocol, like bare naked to the internet, is like just still a bummer. It's very sad. It makes me sad that we still kind of have to keep chatting about that. I'm hopeful that that is something. Can we just turn it off? Could we figure out some other network architecture so that we limit and kind of board up the windows for the attack surface there? I really wish, I wish there weren't more to chat about on the RDP. I hope we can make that go away, because I feel like that's been one of the top contenders for a little too long. It's hard to think on, okay, maybe what else could we do as an alternative, but I'm super interested in, hey, maybe what folks are thinking. Hey, how have you solved for RDP in your environments? Anyone tuning in the chat? On the note of software exploitation and vulnerabilities, like we see that tons and tons with whatever supply chain, if you want to throw a buzzword in the mix, or third-party providers and their software that happens to have some weaknesses. You hit the nail on the head, Ryan, where you're saying, like, look, honestly, you need to have that sort of asset and application inventory. Like, if you just have a baseline of what's in your environment, you can kind of be keeping your ear to the ground of when are there going to be at least new vulnerability advisories and notifications that, hey, something is amok, and then get those patches out as quick as you can. I know patch cycles is, oh, shoot, we have a bottleneck of like 6 months cadence or whatever the case may be. If we can stay on the ball, if we can keep on the pulse of things, just patch. That's another one that kind of brings a tear to my eye. And I don't want to dance too much with phishing, because I know we have been discussing that, but I would echo, I think what Stephanie had already said is like, look, they are getting sophisticated. And I put that in air quotes because I think you got run-of-the-mill spray and pray dumb stuff that no threat actor could be sophisticated. It's still the same sort of dog and pony show, tradecraft show and tell that we've seen. But hey, if they do a little bit of recon, if they just try to understand if a threat actor adversary is doing their homework to see, hey, I know some of these employees are traveling pretty soon. Maybe they're going to be flying out to a company get together or some important meeting with other business decision maker folks. You know what's a really good fish? Hey, tell them the flight's canceled. Here's a legit email from Southwest or United or Delta that says, hey, you know what? Your travel plans have changed. You're going to get people to click on that. And if I may sprinkle in just one bit more, if you get to a login page, if you, the end user, the potential victim, is going to be end up in a site where there's phishing for credentials. If you're using a password manager, I know we're chatting about Security 101, but my goodness, you won't see your cutesy little icon. You won't see it autofill. You won't see things recognized to say that you're on the real service. So that might be just another breadcrumb or puzzle piece that can help clue in and at least get the awareness, at least get the user's experience to say something still looks wrong. We'll report that and cruise along. But sorry, I didn't mean to be rambling. Anyone else got something on that?
Yeah, I
First,
do.
I like that point because I hadn't thought of that before. The domain itself is saved, and the password manager's like, nope. But Aaron, you're up.
Yeah. When we're talking about software vulnerabilities, I feel like coming from the IT world, you can kind of zone out when people are talking about patching. But when we look at it from like the ransomware ecosystem and we see ransomware groups who are making all of their money just hunting after vulnerabilities, it becomes this primary target where they're looking at these vulnerability disclosures as soon as we are, or as soon as the vendor finds them, if they're not finding them first. And it just becomes this serious thing that we have to take into account and make sure that we're understanding the risks that we're exposed to from that vulnerability, that we understand what the vulnerability is capable of, how threat actors might leverage it, and make sure that we're staying on top of that as we're protecting our own systems.
100%, and that's why I like info sharing with you and places where we do that. And by the way, John, I failed to mention that you're with Huntress Labs, and some of the stuff that you folks put out is like, semi-decent in terms of explaining exactly how these things work and helping us all go, wait a minute, we do need to patch that. So just a little shout out there. All right, thank you, folks. We're going to move on to the next question here. And this one involves, policy, right? For anyone who works in policy, what I'm about to say, you're going to be like, nah, you're right and you're wrong. But the way that I look at it, there's two different types of policy in terms of ransomware protection. There's a policy that's written, and then there's a policy that's technically enforced. Right, you can say, well, this is our policy. Well, that's great, but if you don't have anyways, I'll digress. So what are some of the policy gaps that you folks are seeing? And overall, what I mean is, where you basically just either don't have a policy or there's no technical enforcement in place. We're going to start with Jim on this one.
Yeah, well, technical enforcement is a great term to use because that's rarely, if ever, seen, at least from my perspective. So that's a biggie to start off. There's a couple other things that kind of rise to the top of the stew when I think about it. Assuming you have a policy at all, a lot of times the intricacies of incident response are either unclear or ineffective with regards to triage and communication protocols. Right. So when an incident occurs or something happens, you get attacked. Who calls who? Who owns what? What do we do if we can't get a hold of this guy? Or what do we do if this building's out or this whole data center goes down? We don't have access to XYZ. Then what? No one has like a plan B or a plan C. And also a lot of like I'm old, so I call old school BCP and like DRP practices have sort of become a lost art. Just in terms of like having functional and tested warm and cold backups. Everyone has hot, and that's great. But supposing those get encrypted or compromised in some way, where's your other backup? And does it work? And how recent is it? And do you know that for sure? And is that being enforced? Again, technical enforcement. But that applies to like the old stuff that we take for granted, like just back things up and have that backed up as well. And good old hot and cold stuff. Beyond those kind of high level things, relaxed or ineffectively configured security controls, right? So people, not talking to any specific platform or technology or product or whatever, but people buy preventative or protective controls, XDR, EDR, AV, whatever, but they will not tune that technology or configure it in a way that makes it work. So for example, with ransomware, there is all kinds of crazy like OS-centric command stuff that happens and all kinds of lull bin stuff that occurs before malware or ransomware is even involved. And a lot of modern preventative and protective technologies can stop and see that stuff, but people don't enable it or are not, they don't want to inhibit their ability to function as they normally do. So they relax the settings or relax the configuration. So all that stuff just goes on by and happens. Maybe you see it, maybe you don't, maybe it's in a log somewhere, but technologies are people are spending a lot of money on really fancy stuff and they're not using it in a functional and preventative protective way. Again, with regards to ransomware attacks, there's a lot of wacky stuff that happens way before like even malware or ransomware is involved. That is pretty easy to see and detect nowadays that people just don't enable or are maybe standoffish about enabling it because maybe it'll affect performance or affect this or that. So that's a biggie. Ineffective and relaxed security controls. Kind of basically wasting money on the stuff you buy to protect yourself against all these things. Yeah. So outside of that, there's things like lax password policies, lax password reuse stuff. That is a big one. Passwords get sent out in leaks and people can immediately use those for all kinds of different accounts. Stuff that the access and accounts that people are buying from brokers and vendors, isn't going stale, because people aren't changing their passwords or rotating things. So when threat actors buy passwords or buy credentials, they work because they haven't been changed or rotated in an effective amount of time. So stuff like that, and I could go down the product protective preventative control route for hours, but I'll kind of open it up. But those are kind of the biggies that I see is ineffective communications protocols, and no plan B or plan C, and then poorly configured controls on endpoints and servers and all that stuff, wasting money where they could be protecting themselves.
Jim, I love that. Anyone who's ever worked for a product company, one of your nightmares is when a client calls in and is like, we got hit with this and we paid for you so that we don't, and you look and you're like, you're in detection only mode. Like,
right. Yeah. This would, okay, we could have done that. Yeah.
Like, what the heck? Okay, Stephanie, your hand was up first.
Yeah, since I see Michael's hands up too, I'll make mine short. I got two that really jumped out from what Jim was saying that I wanted to tack on to. One is the backup story. So I've worked a lot of big engagements lately with really large scale clients. But this really can influence for small companies all the way up to the big majors, is what kind of Jim talked to is like testing your backups. But the other part is like, what is your backup recovery capacity? Not your storage capacity, but the ability to really press the button and get your systems back in a timely manner. Because especially in large enterprises, but again, across the board, if it's crawling at a really small wire allocations to get massive servers and databases back up, you're going to be down for a while, even though you have really strong and secure backups in place. So backup security, but backup capacity on that efficiency that you can do, or if you can expand it, maybe at the base level, you don't need major speeds, but when you're looking at products, when you're looking at architecture, can you expand that capacity quickly when you need it? Even if the choice is made to actually pay the ransomware, one thing that a lot of people are not aware of is decryptors are super slow. So if you're gonna pay the ransomware and to get your data back, get your systems back, that is going to be a massive rate limiting step as well. So downtime is really gonna come down to how fast you can get back from your backups. The other one quickly, and I think this one a lot of people are aware of, but few people actually do well and stick to, is account policies. So account least privileged policies, almost everybody has them and almost no one follows them for what I see. We typically have one of those things is Ryan asked me for access to this database. I'm like, yep, sure, you're now an admin. And that type of stuff happens a lot and you get kind of least privileged skew very quickly in even the best intentioned environments. And that's stuff where we're talking about, we just talked about software exploitations. If you have service accounts that are domain admins that don't need to, and they don't need to do different activity, a software gets popped, an appliance gets popped, they have that domain admin account just sitting there on that system, you can run off to the races real fast. So just hardening around those softwares, but also those policies around users is massively important. And with that, I'll turn over to Michael.
Yeah, you had some really great points there. I would say, just to chime in on the backup piece with recovery, snapshots are amazing. So if you don't have snapshots, please do snapshots. Tape does take days, weeks. Decryptors to that point too. Yeah, there's, sometimes they don't work. Sometimes the way the encryption was pushed out, you can't even decrypt certain servers. So yeah, and also if you do get a decryptor, back up. If it's a critical server, back it up first before trying to decrypt it. So yeah, I think we could have a full conversation around basically backups and best practices. One last thing on that, now I'm getting carried away. Make sure it's a local account, not in the domain. For backups, it's still a common theme that we see even after highlighting it to different environments. But on the policy side, I would say a big issue is just having people follow the policy. Even though you put something on paper, there's not a lot of enforcement around it. It typically does kind of a checkbox for compliance, unfortunately. And some policies are great, but if they're not followed, then it really doesn't help. And then I know the team that you guys were mentioning, incident response plans, I've seen those kind of be set and forget also, where an incident comes along, there's 2 to 3 forensic teams on the incident response plan. That's not very effective. Or the first call is maybe a negotiations team, and that doesn't really help get the client in the right spot too. So really kind of looking through your IRP is a good step forward, and integrating other teams like your identity team, your engineering team, how can they play into the IRP as well. So those are all great points that you all made. But I just want to throw those couple in too.
If we have time, and I doubt we're going to have time to get to it, to be honest, but one of our questions coming up possibly involves IR processes and gaps within. So let's move on. Let's talk about, okay, many people look at security, I should say, many people should look at security as a multi-tiered, multifaceted type of thing, right? So you've got, for example, your endpoint protections, and then you've got your network level protections, and then you've got your policy level. Anyways, so when it comes to the endpoints, what are some security 101 things that we're seeing that are done often? Or I should say, let me rephrase that. What are some non-security 101 things we're seeing that are being done often and are leading to like, when the threat actor gets in kind of thing? We're going to start with Michael. You're back up.
Yeah, I know everyone was kind of talking through some of the points already I was going to make here. One big one would be first, enabling blocking on your EDR. So a lot of EDRs through incidents that we work are, blocking is not enabled. So you have complete visibility into everything the threat actor did, but nothing was actually blocked. So I'm always surprised to see that. Then following that is enabling your MDR provider to actually take action. Where we see, clients kind of hesitate of, should we have our MDR team actually be able to isolate hosts? I think we're well beyond that. It just should be standard. I know when I first got into SecOps, it was kind of a debate of, what happens if they take down our environment? Well, good, you're not impacted. So continue to see basically hesitation on taking action or not knowing that it's actual threat from clients, and it then leading into an impact. And then in addition to blocking, have had recent cases where there's too much whitelisting. So basically within the EDR, whitelist everything as it comes up. The client, and these are big companies that had a lot of whitelisting, right? So very strong security teams, very mature operations. And, the CEO is asking how could this even happen in our environment? And you look at, there's whitelisting for almost, for this example, there's around 23 different whitelist rules created. And then fully deploying EDR, right? So that's especially large enterprises, small enterprises, it kind of, I still am surprised. We still get cases where EDR was pushed out on workstations, but not servers. So it's just this kind of misunderstanding of what coverage should be that continues to kind of come up. So those would be the basics and the big ones. In addition to that would be Labs. It's free, push it out, prevent local admins from someone getting one local admin and being able to get to every host in the environment. And then another one that we're all seeing is remote management tooling. So it's great to have as a resource and environment, but it's definitely common for almost each ransomware actor to install or leverage an existing tool. So make sure you have MFA on yours, block other RMM tools that you don't want in your environment, and get alerted on them as well. So we keep seeing that it's hard to detect, right? Your EDR, MDR teams are not going to really block that outright. So at the point, they're going to ask, this is an approved tool. We've seen environments with 3 or 4 different, there's even worse, but there's a lot of RMM tools out there. So try to set a stronger standard there. So outside of that, I'll kind of defer to the team of like any other best practices you guys would want to highlight for endpoints. But I would say, AD hardening would be another piece, asset management, know what's public facing. Those aren't necessarily directly tied to endpoints, but still really big pieces to assist there.
Michael is passionate about that, and those were some phenomenal answers. I'm glad this panel is recorded, because people, like, you covered almost everything you touched on. We have in my course somewhere, and I'm like, yeah, that one. We're gonna go Jim and then John for this one.
I was going to say just amen to enabling your MDR team to take action. I've seen too many times where the phone calls or communications that have to take place between detecting something and getting some guy on the phone that says, okay, you can do stuff. That's too much time. Minutes, hours go by. Sometimes you don't have that much time. So amen to enabling your MDR to actually protect and enforce stuff. And then also on the RMM side of things, threat actors, what I call play RMM roulette. They'll just find one that works. There are tons of ways. I mean, there are tools staged on GitHub with leaked accounts that are used for well-known RMMs, and they'll just start pulling stuff down and use whatever works. There's a huge list of stuff. There are batch files out there that just go through lists of RMMs with test accounts, and it's all automated. So know what RMMs are good in your environment and okay, but there's a whole lot that aren't, and they're using them all, and they're going to use what works. So amen to the RMM thing too.
Yes, for folks to be aware, I work on a managed threat hunting team. I left IR after about 5 years, and when our MTH/MDR teams at my day job, when we can't do a thing to enforce, you have your own SLAs, like as an MDR, as an MSSP, whatever it might be, but the client doesn't necessarily have those. So you're reaching out to the client and you're like, hey, look it. And then, 12 hours later, they're like, that's cool, we blocked it. And you're like, well, all right, cool story. Okay, John.
No, thank you. I would echo again, a lot of isolation or quarantine, whatever capability that, again, your SOC or MDR provider can do that will save the day more often than not. It might, I don't know, if there's downtime, question mark. Well, okay, saved whatever millions of dollars for ransomware incident. The only, I'm sorry, thing I would dance with as well along the lines of sort of the allow list and RMMs, oftentimes even more narrow than EDR, MDR conversations, but just regular antivirus, AV. Oftentimes you can configure exclusions, or some software, maybe some RMMs, may require antivirus exclusions to like do their thing, which makes me a little bit uneasy. I think there's a pretty big case study in some recent years of humongous ransomware Armageddon on just some antivirus exclusions set for the working directory of the agent. So double check, review, maybe take another quick glance at what antivirus exclusions might be out and about. That's just another thing I'd sprinkle in.
Kaseya. Folks,
I didn't want to say it, but you did it. The K word.
Sorry, nothing against Kaseya, but there's a particular tool that its whole purpose was to push things out and to run things, and people just globally whitelisted all the Kaseya folders, and someone got access to Kaseya and started pushing some bad things out, but everyone, who really suffered had them whitelisted because, all right, anyway. So we're gonna move on, and we just talked about the endpoint, and we've got, another 10 minutes or so here. We got at least 1 or 2 more questions. What about the network side? So, some folks are old school like me, and they're like, snort, you should have snort rules. Like, why don't you have snort rules enabled? I truly think, and many of us believe this in the industry, that we went from network, only network, and people were like, what about the endpoints? And we're like, oh, wait a minute, endpoint. And then now we're like, well, but you're still doing something about the network side, right? And a lot of folks are not anymore. They just kind of gave up on it. So for the network, start with Aaron. What do you got for us? What do you think is we could do better?
Yeah, like you said, Ryan, really we see it best when organizations are complementing both really with the endpoint stuff and also the network stuff. Because there's often a lot going on the network that you're not going to see just on an endpoint. This, again, it is important to make sure you have endpoint detection installed on all endpoints, because anytime you have an endpoint that doesn't have that visibility, that's often a haven for whatever can happen on that host. And it's often what we see with a lot of network type of things. Sometimes you might have a device on the network that a vendor requires you to have. It might have software that's outside of your normal tech stack, and it might not support your endpoint detection tool. But you need to be aware of those things. You need to be aware about what software is installed, and what might be vulnerable, and what might be a threat to your own environment. Likewise, it's important to recognize if there's unauthorized host in your environment. Sometimes we see employees who connect their personal devices to the network. And you can see some really bad things happen when those types of things happen. So ensuring that you have policies and technologies in place to prevent that from happening. Whether that's with like this third-party supplier, that you have processes in place to make sure that they're using software and hardware that is appropriate, that's updated, that is monitored, that you're also making sure that there's policies and ways to detect if a employee does connect a device to the network. And just making sure you have a way to get a good baseline. A lot of network scanning tools can help provide that. We talked a little bit about having RDP open. Well, if you scan your assets, you're able to identify those. You're able to identify what ports are open, what vulnerabilities, and what risks you might have. And you can also identify when assets appear that don't belong.
Anyone remember network access control, NAC? Remember when like that was the big thing, and then now people are just like, whatever, there's an open port, plug in, like whatever. Stephanie, go for it.
Yeah, so really one of the things I want to jump out on network is segmentation. We see a lot of things go into play where it ends up being where you really look in and they have, hey, I created some VLANs, but yet all the VLANs can talk to each other. And every single VLAN has permissions to go through to another VLAN, host to host, workstation to workstation, not even through jump boxes or different routes. And then some of the times, again, they can go through jump boxes, but every single pocket of the environment can kind of talk to each other. So that is critically important. And we've talked about some of these things, especially going back to software vulnerabilities and things like that are really hard to just outright prevent. You know, things like that when you're talking about least privilege access users and segmentation of the network are going to be your major wins when it comes to actually reducing the impact of the actual the circumstance that happens when you have that deployment or anything like that. You know, the less it can reach into that environment, the better you're going to be off in the less impact. And really we just see firewalls, which my favorite analogy is it's Swiss cheese. It's just holes everywhere, looking everywhere, and can get pretty much across the entire enterprise very quickly. And then one of the newer ones, I guess not newer at this point, but one of the ones to keep in mind with a lot of your later and greater firewalls is SSL decryption and TLS inspection. You know, a lot of people are bringing it in. They love to have encryption on the wire, which is a great practice to have. But if you're not inspecting that traffic as it goes in and out, you're missing a lot. Stuff coming in poorly and dangerous, and stuff and exfiltration going out that you may not be able to detect.
I like that. Let's see, Jim, you get your hand up. Go for it.
Yeah, just real quick, also on the monitoring side of things, in terms of exfiltration, monitor for stuff like traffic to mega or Dropbox or Tor nodes or that kind of thing. Just be on the lookout for that activity, as just one sort of indicator on the network side.
There's one vendor, I don't want to bust them out right now. I don't think this is the time and place. There's so many people watching right now and potentially the recordings. But I think Stephanie's laughing because she's like, I know what it is. There's one forensic software vendor where when you go to their web, and they're like, their software is amazing and we use it often in IR. But when you go to the download page, it just takes you right to Mega. And I'm always like, no, what are you doing? Stop it. Okay, anyways. Don't do that. Don't do that. If you're a software vendor, stop it. Get off of Mega. Okay, we've got a couple more minutes here to go, and I think let me check the view. Yeah. And by the way, there was something in the chat that someone asked a question about the view. If you go to the top right-hand side of your screen in Zoom, like when you have to mouse over it for it to show up, you'll see view. And if you're on speaker, you'll just see like a whoa of the person speaking at the given time. But if you change it to gallery, then you should see all of us and Ashton's drawing going on at the same time. So let's do this one. Many of us have worked in IR or have just worked IR for whatever purposes. And everyone here has. That's part of why you're here. So what are we seeing in terms of gaps in IR processes that are causing these problems? We're going to start with Stephanie. And Stephanie, I know that you're like, gaps, that's like what I deal with every day, all day. So keep it to the top item or items you got here, but what do you got?
Yeah, definitely want to make sure we have time for everybody else to jump in here. I know we have a few minutes left. So really, I think Jim hit this one on the head a bit earlier when he talked about comms plan, comms plan, comms plan. And I'm going to stop repeating things 3 times when I get excited. But in general, that is one of the things that we see as the biggest makes and breaks within these organizations when they have different breaches and different responses going on. Really getting that incident command protocol and procedure stood up and tested before an incident happens is so critical. Really talking about who's making the decisions, what authorization procedures are going to happen during a rapid response, who's the one that gets the final say, really getting away from the telephone game during an incident, because that's what we see a lot is, hey, XYZ said to deploy this, and then, oh, nope, Jim said to deploy this, and Michael said to deploy this, and he said I'm good to go, I can bring the system live, and then, oh crap, we didn't get our EDR tool back on there before we did, and that was impacted, and certain scans didn't happen and things like that. So really having that tested procedure in relation to who's going to be where the flow of traffic is going to be. And then the other big one that I see a lot is inventory. Really, when you don't know what you have, don't know what visibility you need, what you need people to be able to have access to during an incident, and how you're going to recover each different part of the network, that ends up being critical parts of both being able to protect, but also respond. So really part of that entire incident command structure and policy that needs to be in place really is an in-depth inventory of what you'll need to recover and what aspects does that mean. Yes, you have hosts, but usually there's network components, there's policy components, there's all types of different pieces around recovery. So I'll pause there. Again, like Ryan said, I have a laundry list, but Michael, looks like over to you.
I feel like I'm trying to avoid jumping in too much, but yeah, I just agree with everything you're saying. One big piece that setting this up right now is important before we have an actual incident, because of the executive team, the board, different people that just don't understand, maybe what the recovery timeline would be. So if you kind of start stitching that together in an incident response plan too, or somewhere where this is kind of the average, if we were going to recover tomorrow, how long it would take us if these are all of our critical servers. So constantly talking with, large enterprises and breaking down what are your critical servers if you needed them to be up tomorrow if you were impacted, and it ends up being 50, 100 servers. So kind of whittling that back and explaining that that's just not a reality. So if you're going to be impacted with an actual incident, we really need to have a serious discussion around, what can we get up and running within a couple of days for the business. And a couple of days is, as we all know, very unlikely, but if we get lucky. But yeah, kind of setting that expectation and then putting it on paper. So, executive team members, different team members come in and out so they can all kind of get onboarded to the same tune of music so they can understand, what is the process, what teams are engaged, what's the average time for collection, forensics, what tooling are they going to use if they get into the environment and start collecting information? Can they use our pre-existing EDR, or is there going to be a new EDR that has to be deployed? So, there's a lot of nuances to the process that your internal business would not know. You have to really, talk with the different partners that you have and understand how they would react because you're dependent on them as much as you are as your team. And then one big thing that is commonly overlooked is we're always lucky in ransomware incidents with a champion on the client side. There's always this one technical SME that's been there for 10 years. They know where all the skeletons are hidden. Having things on paper in case that person gets sick, that's happened a couple times, is very helpful, but also just knowing, how are you communicating your infrastructure internally? Is there more than one person that understands it to that depth? Not having one person that this is essentially your crux if they, unfortunately leave right before an incident or, worst case scenario comes up there. So just a couple other items to throw in there too.
Thank you. I thought I saw another hand go up, but I think I made that up. So in that case, let's see. Do we have time for one more? What's this little guy on? I'm going to change this up a lot. Not a lot. A little bit is what I meant to say. I'm going to go through and just chat with each of you real quick. Collaboration in the community. Whether the collaboration be threat intelligence platforms, whether it be like one-to-one, how many of us know one another, or whatever it is. What are some of your major wins essentially? What are some of the things where you're like, this works really well type of thing? Let's leave with some leading thoughts in regard to that. So on my screen right now, I've got Jim up right next to me. So Jim, what you got? Collaboration.
Well, I guess I'll answer from a just totally personal perspective. I have yet to find a great tip or threat intelligence platform that works awesome for me and the rest of the world, and everything collaborates and everything, ingests correctly, and I get stuff out of it, and there's automation on the back end to connect all the dots I want it to connect. And to me, that doesn't exist. I haven't found it. I've tried a lot of things, but what's most valuable is the individual back and forth. These trust groups, Slack channels, emails, face to face. Hallway conversations at conferences, all that kind of stuff is for me the most valuable way to meet people, forge relationships, but then also kind of create these streams of chatter and data that go back and forth and are the most valuable. So I get the most valuable out of things like email and Slack trust groups and that sort of thing, far and above over any sort of platform or utility or tool.
And that's how I met you. Speaking of which, Aaron, what you got?
Yeah. One of the things that I've consistently tried to do is be as generous as I can with information and also getting others involved. And that's really helped one me get involved, but also others are generous towards me so that I'm able to get involved as well and contribute however I can. And it's had some really great wins. I've been able to get a bunch of people get together so that we can target a common cause. And there's a lot of benefit there. Ryan, you're muted.
Oh, I finally did it. I almost went through the whole summit without doing that. Oh, whatever. John, you shared, a little bit with the community through your YouTube channel and other avenues. What are your thoughts?
Oh, goodness. No, I know the YouTube thing is cheesy, but again, trying to echo what Aaron was saying, like, look, getting information out and about free, trying to, hey, have the megaphone to just spread awareness, and Slack groups and, hey, collaboration with human to human, like real just interaction one-on-one is I don't want to say manual, but it's the best way I think that it really comes to light. When we get to put together, I don't know, whether it's a blog post or an article or a write-up, if we maybe share a little, quick preview, it's like, hey, this is some sweet threat intel or some tradecraft that we've been seeing. Just wanted to give some folks in the community a heads up before we go publish with this thing. Oftentimes folks will see like, oh, hey, we're seeing that too. Did you see this part? And then, I don't know, it can expand and grow and really work together. I think that's an awesome thing. Or even after the fact, hey, a blog or write-up is released, and then there's more chatter and communication that comes from it. I think just getting that out is the best way to start that discourse.
Stephanie.
Yeah, I mean, echoing a lot of what John and Aaron said, I think the more generous you are, the more comes back to you. The other thing I think I would say on collaboration is not to get overwhelmed with the vast amount of collaboration that there can be within the industry. And I think that's one of the things that is one of the great and shining stars about our industry is just how much collaboration people are willing to have. But at the same time, it is easy to just be like, inundated with all of this data and information and overwhelmed with what to do. So, find something you like and start actioning upon it. If John's YouTube videos like really is what you're jamming, make sure you listen to them and take the nuggets away and see what you can actually action out of that information. When it's coming to like those big bang for your buck things and the conversations where you have those relationships, it's usually a specific scenario or a specific thing that you're looking after. But you can get a lot of benefit from just really kind of grabbing one, seeing how you can action it, and then expanding your circle further and further and further.
I like it. Michael.
I have a couple of things here. I would say one thing too is anyone that hasn't really shared the work. I've known so many smart people behind the scenes that don't share the good work that they're doing. They don't think it's good enough. So that's a big thing is don't be afraid to share the work that no one's gonna, there's no bad idea. It's just a community. We're all in it together. And that's the power behind the cybersecurity community. So and to that point, setting up quick one-on-one calls, I feel like has been really helpful. Just 15 minutes connecting with other people in the industry, competitors, peers, it doesn't matter. You're going to learn something. And, it's always just helpful to build up those relationships. It's a very small world, especially in the cybersecurity community as we keep going through it. And then panels has been something that I found extremely helpful with connecting. We all connect before the panel, we get to catch up. We all have very busy day jobs. So I feel like panels have been really eye-opening for me over the years around being able to really just connect with people that you don't maybe get to talk to day to day, or get to really kind of collaborate and sync up on what you're seeing in the industry. So would encourage people to kind of jump in and look for opportunities to do panels at any type of conference, especially SANS, but any type of conference. But yeah, those are the big ones I want to hit on.
Those are great. Totally agree. Speaking of which, so on my screen in this order, thank you, Jim, Stephanie, Michael, John, Aaron. Thank you so much. I had a blast. Hopefully folks learned a lot from this, and I'm glad this was recorded because there were just nuggets flying everywhere. So